All right, Birkat Torah. Ready?
Okay, Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kidshanu mitzvotah v'tzivanu la'asot divrei Torah. V'ha'aref Adonai Eloheinu et divrei Torah b'finu u'b'fi amcha Beit Yisrael v'niyeh anachnu b'tza'ateinu Tza'ata'ei amcha Beit Yisrael Kulanu Yorei Shmecha Ulomdei Toratecha Lishma
Baruch
Baruch
atah
atah Adonai Melamed Torah le'amo Yisrael
Baruch
Baruch
atah
atah Adonai Eloheinu
Eloheinu
melech
melech
haolam
haolam asher
asher
b'charbanu
b'charbanu
mikol
mikol
ha'amim
ha'amim
v'natan lanu et Torato.
et
Baruch
Torato
atah
Baruch atah
Adonai
Adonai Noten HaTorah.
Amen. And so today we'll be led by a tag team of husband and wife, Neil Barber and his wonderful wife, Varda.
Wonderful.
Way.
Okay, Boker Tov, good morning, everybody. And like I said before you were all on, we decided to do a Chet and Natalie act this morning, where Neil is going to be doing some things, and I will basically be his sidekick and introduce the Parsha. We're looking at Deuteronomy 3:23 through 7. And it is, as Velda said to me this week, it is so rich. There is so much in here that you could take any one of these things and do a whole study workshop on it. But we're kind of going to glean it, and I'll give a very, very fast summary and then look at some of the beginnings of it. Let's start with the name of the Parsha. It's Ve'et Hanan, which is really a pleading. Moshe pleaded with Hashem to let him enter the land together with the people. I read some English translations that said he asked. No. It's not Bikesh, it's Hitchanen. He begged. He really wanted to enter after, he spent greater part of his life in the journey to get to Eretz Israel. So basically, the Parsha comprises how Moshe pleads for the land. He makes arguments to obey the law. He recounted setting up the cities of refuge. He cites the 10 Commandments and the Shema, and he gave instructions for the Israelites to conquer the land when they enter it. Moshe orders the children of Israel to pay attention, to follow the laws given by God in order to be worthy of the land that they're about to enter and to receive and to enter. That's in chapter 4. And in talking about the laws, it says, Chukim u'mishpatim. Chukim u'mishpatim. Why is it repeated in two different ways? Chukim are laws, mishpatim are laws. But the subtle difference here is that chukim refers to laws between man and God. Laws of purity, kashrut, sensual life, restrictions, and so forth. And mishpatim are man-made laws that are civil laws, criminal laws. And it's interesting also because the mishpatim in modern Hebrew has become a court trial, is a mishpat. And so it has really taken the meaning of just a civil law. And so the question is why? Why should they follow these laws? Does anyone have a concept of why he's telling them to follow the laws? Just because I said so? I don't think so. The reason that he is telling them is explained in 4:5, so that you will be a great nation. Chachamim v'nevonim, wise and discerning. But what is a great nation? Next sentence down in 4:7, it explains that being a great nation is a nation that has access to this incredible power. It has access to God. The Israelites are so close to God that they can reach out to him and he performs miracles for them. And none of the other civilizations have a God that is so accessible. And that's what's going to make them into a great nation. Asher lo Elohim krovim elav, which the nation that God is so close to. So that's why he strives for them to listen, obey the laws, so that they can be great in relationship to their relationship with God. And the covenant of Sinai is also mentioned, and the 10 commandments are recalled. And once again, the people are exhorted to heed the commandments. And I believe Neil is going to speak more about that. Moshe also speaks about the Shema, the credo of Judaism, and commands Israel to show their love for Adonai and keep God's laws and ordinances. That happens in chapter 6. Moshe warns the people not to commit idolatry by worshiping the gods of nations that they will conquer in Israel. And of course, one of the ways to do that is to stay within your own tribe, to not intermarry, and to not copy the ways of your neighbor. So that's really an intro of all of the things that you will find in this parsha. And Neil is going to look at a few things in more detail. And then he's got a special treat for you, which is a little different than what we've done before. So stay tuned. Okay, Neil.
All right, so let's see if I can get my mic on and you get your mic off.
Oh, no. Leave it the way it was.
Keep it on?
Yes, you hear him fine, right?
Everyone can hear me?
Yeah, of course.
Yes.
So this truly is a very, very rich parsha, and really it's been a challenge to try to figure out which to highlight. And indeed, as I was reading through it, what struck me is that there's actually something in every one of the 7 aliyot and the 7 readings that I related to, and I think everyone here should relate to, as you'll see in a minute, because so much of it is so central, and what you'll see is how much of it has actually been incorporated into our liturgy. And that's what I'm going to be challenging you to see if you could relate to it also. So I'm going to try to summarize each of the 3 readings very briefly, and then we'll embellish on 1 or 2 points of each one. I'll see how that works this time. So Barta gave a great overview of it. I think the only thing I would add is that this parasha is always read on Shabbat Nachamu, which is today, because it's immediately after Tisha B'Av. The rabbis say it's because it describes how the Israelites would sin and be banished from the land. So we read it actually, I guess it was last Sunday morning at the Shacharit service. So the first aliyah, which is Deuteronomy 3:23 to 4:4 for anyone who's following, Moses pleads, as Bart explained, at Hanan to let him cross over to the other side of the Jordan River. We know that God was wrathful and he wouldn't listen, and he told Moses never to speak of the matter again. Moses' banishment is to be blamed on the Israelites. Moses climbs Mount Pisgah, which is just Hebrew for height, We relate to it as the modern site of Mount Nebo, which is just on the other side of the Jordan River in present-day Jordan, to look at the land. And this ends up with Moses then telling Joshua his instructions to imbue him with strength, to lead the people and to allot the land. And one of the things that struck me in this reading is that Moses exhorts the Israelites to heed God's law, saying, Lo tosifu et divrei asher anochi mitzaveh etchem, v'lo terlegem mimeno. Which should be translated, don't add anything to these laws and don't take anything away from them. And that struck me because some of us on this call, Varda and David, were involved in another study group where this past year we've been reading Maimonides' Mishnah Torah, and we've been reading just recently Yesodei Torah, the foundations of the Torah. And this one pasuk, don't add anything to it, don't take anything away from it, was cited by Maimonides as his discourse as to who's a true prophet and who's not a true prophet. He cited, of course, that Moses was a true prophet, but he used this pasuk to describe who might not be a true prophet, who would take away, who would add to it. There are some exceptions to it, of course, but it was something that I could relate to. The idea is that you don't want to dilute out or weaken any of God's laws, so you're exhorted to follow it exactly as God had promulgated. Although we'll see something very interesting about that in a minute. So this pasuk, this reading ends with Deuteronomy 4:4. And it's the first of a couple of psukim that I want to see if I could screen share with you something. So give me a second to see if this is going to work. Let's see. And I don't have it. Give me a second here.
Yeah, 4:4 that Neil just mentioned is
Okay. Is that shared?
In the English, he says, while you who held fast to the Lord your God are all alive today. So he's speaking to the people and he says, look at what happened to all those who didn't make it because they did not follow the laws and they were struck down.
Is there a screen share coming up now?
No. Do you have screen sharing ability?
Here it is. I got it. Wait a minute. Here we go.
It's coming up. There it is.
It's coming up.
Yeah, it's there.
Why don't I see it? That's strange. All right, I'm going to use Varda's screen here.
Oh, okay.
So this is going to be our unique task today. We're going to have a little quiz. I'm going to give you a couple of psukim from each of the readings, and you have to identify where and when it appears. You should all be familiar with these.
In liturgy.
In liturgy,
yeah.
Right. So do I have any volunteer to read this first one, Deuteronomy 4:4, either in English or in Hebrew? All right. Varda, why don't you read that in Hebrew?
ואתם הדבקים באדוני אלוהיכם חיים כולכם היום. And you who held fast to the Lord your God are all alive today.
Does anyone recognize that? Dr. Broder.
Yeah, before we read the Torah, the portion every Shabbat.
It doesn't ring a bell. Are you sure?
Wait a minute.
Doesn't ring a bell?
No, I mean, I don't recall.
Go to the
Is
next
this when we
screen, go to
put
the next
the-
screen, but
Is
I'm
this
gonna
when we
have
put the
Varda go to
Torah
next
down?
screen.
I don't have control of your PowerPoint.
No, it's on your screen. Oh,
Is this when we put the Torah down after taking it out of the ark? Don't we say that before we open the scroll?
So whoever just said that I wasn't following gets 2 points because that's
That was
absolutely
Marty.
correct. Marty? But
Yay.
usually I'm good.
I was
at-
paying attention.
Give me a second, folks. I'm
He's technical
being
problems
technically
here.
challenged here. I thought I had this thing set up right.
Where's Caitlin when you need her?
Why don't I have my screen share?
Why don't you end your current, are you trying to show something else?
Yeah,
Yeah, I'm just
Yes.
trying to move that.
to his next page.
Yeah, you have to try getting out of screen share and back into it with your new slide.
Good idea.
All right, so I'm gonna do, let's see if this is gonna work. Stop screen share. Now you say start it again.
Yeah.
Huh.
Well,
Come up.
no, go back
Yeah.
out
Same page.
and when you hit share screen, it'll give you options which screen to share. Do you have the other screen prompted? Ready?
Yeah, what I did, actually. It says I'm screen sharing. Does everyone see
You
the
are, but you're,
PowerPoint?
yes, but it's the same one as
It's the same
before.
one as before?
You need to have the next screen already on, showing on your computer so you can select it.
Either do that or share your whole computer. And that way you can just prop the thing that you want to show.
You know what? Part of the problem is my computer's frozen.
Oh, yes.
Oh.
I have a bigger problem here. Wait a minute, let's see if this is gonna work here.
Oh, no.
Wait a minute.
Or you could just tell us.
Yeah, but that would ruin my fun here.
Try it. Here you go.
There you go.
Oh, okay. Is that visible to everyone? Because I can't see.
Sure is.
Yes, it is.
Okay, so as you can see, this is a page from our Sidur Sim Shalom.
Oh, very
And as Marty said, we say this Tem Biyom et Tem Hayom Kulchem Hayom. As we take the Torah out, the Gabbai will say Tiglev Tira'eh, and then we say this sentence. The question is, why do we say this at this point?
Why do we say this at this point?
Well, the rabbis say that as we start reading the Torah or learning about the Torah, we should think about embodying ourselves into remaining steadfast to God. So the rabbis have chosen this at this point. Okay, am I screen sharing now?
Yes.
Okay. So
It's interesting though, because that's what the rabbis say, but I think for a lot of people, when the Torah is taken out and we all stand and we all say this, I think they feel more united with their kehillah, with their congregation, with the people, than they are necessarily with the Spirit of God.
I also have to say that I attend almost every Shabbat morning for like, a long time now, more than a decade. And I never heard anybody say this. And I've certainly never been aware of it. So if it's done very quietly.
Well, it is done quietly. It's certainly done in the morning minyan, I have to tell you that. And I do hear some people saying it on Shabbat morning, but maybe as part of summer shul, we will now be able to relate to this. And when it comes up in an hour or two, people will say it and think about it. And more importantly,
I am happy to have learned it.
So who says it in the sanctuary? Is it the Chazan who says it, or does the congregation say it?
well, look at the instructions right above the yellow highlighting.
It says congregation, yeah. It says
Yeah.
everyone.
Yeah, or Gabbai. So the Gabbai will say it also for those who are kibitzing and not paying attention. The Gabbai will say it.
Yeah, gee, I don't know who that could be.
All right. Okay, let's move on. Second reading.
Cool.
In the second reading, Moses argues that observing the laws faithfully should prove to other people about Israel's wisdom in choosing God, because no other nation has laws that are as perfect as those that have been given to the Israelites by God. Moses urges the Israelites to take utmost care not to forget the things that they saw on Mount Sinai. Remember, these were laws that were given to their children and their children's children, how they stood in front of God. It says in Mount Horeb, which we now associate with the traditional Mount Sinai, it was ablaze with fire. And this will come up in something, if I have time, I'll talk about at the very, very end. Moses invites the Israelites to consider whether any other people have ever heard the voice of God speaking out of fire and have survived. And he talks about the awesome power that their God has done for them in Egypt before their very eyes. And then we have in Deuteronomy 4:34, and now we're going to see if I am capable of doing another screen share. Wait, this is.
God help me.
Sorry for this technical stuff, folks.
While you're doing that, if I may make a point,
Sure.
it's kind of interesting to me that one of the arguments that Moses is making is that they will be the envy of other nations. It is kind of appealing to their vanity. And this is something that he did directly with God earlier in the Torah. I wish I could remember where, but in one of those moments where God stands ready to destroy the entire nation, Moses says to him, what are other nations going to think if you have chosen these people and have formed this covenant with them, and then you destroy them all? It will diminish you in their eyes. So Moses is not above using those kind of arguments. You know, if it works with God, it certainly ought to work with the nation of Israel.
Okay.
That's interesting.
Yeah. All right. So this is, thank you, David. So this is Deuteronomy 4:3, the end of our second reading. Any volunteers to read this in either English or Hebrew and see if we could identify where we know it from?
This one is more familiar.
Yes. Uviyad chazaka uvizro netuya moraim gdolim. By a mighty hand, by an outstretched arm, and by great terrors.
And where do we know this from?
From Shavuot, of course. Just kidding.
Any other
Just kidding.
place?
That's us.
And I think that's the tshuva that the Yeled Chacham receives,
This
right?
is, yeah,
Pesach.
well, no, this is from the Pesach, from the Passover Haggadah, where they're explaining what, you know, with mighty's force means. It's actually mentioned a few times in the Haggadah. This is just the one place I took it from. It says, B'yad Chazakah v'zaro netuya b'morim v'golim, to explain what terrible might it is, to give a sense of just how powerful God could be, right? And then at the very end of the second reading, let's see if this is going to work.
Yeah, it's coming down.
Here we go. So this is in the context of Moses admonishing the Israelites again to observe God's laws and commandments, that they might go well with their children, that they may live long and remain in the land, and that God will assign for them all time. And then we end the second reading with this psuk. Anyone want to volunteer for this one and see if they could identify where we know it from?
I'll be happy to read it if you make it a little bigger.
A little bigger.
Yeah.
How's that?
Yeah. וידעת היום ושבת אל לבביך כי אדוני הוא האלוהים בשמיים ממעל ועל הארץ מתחת אין עוד, אין עוד.
I've already gave a clue.
Elena.
And
Elena.
you are right. There it is. It's the end of the first paragraph of Elenu.
Very good.
We sing every single day.
That's right.
So clearly we're familiar with a lot of psukim from this parsha. I'll give one more. This is a bonus question from 444 on this bottom one here. This one, I assume everyone knows this one.
Hagba.
וזאת התורה.
אשר שם משה לפני בני ישראל
etc.
Yeah.
So,
Uh,
so you guys get extra points for not only reading it, identifying it, but singing it. Okay. All right, we are moving on to our third reading. And this is interesting because if you remember Deuteronomy,
You
basically.
mean the third
The
aliyah?
third aliyah, what did I say? Third aliyah. Remember that Deuteronomy is basically these three main discourses of Moshe to the Israelites. And this next aliyah between 441 and 449 is actually a break between the end of the first discourse and the beginning of the second one. It talks about these cities of refuge, that if you've been involved in manslaughter, you can run to one of these cities and have refuge. And there's a whole bunch of legal discourse pointing out that this is only for manslaughter, not for murder.
This for those who killed unintentionally. Yeah, that's why manslaughter.
Right, manslaughter being homicide that's unintentional killing, of course. There's an interesting article, or actually idea, why this was put right in the middle dafka of these two discourses. It's a whole long theory, and if we have some time, I'll try to get to it a little later, but it's something I find fascinating about the discovery of some fragments, some Torah scrolls that were discovered 80 years before the Dead Sea Scrolls. We're told that they were forgeries, but I think they're really not forgeries, but it's a fascinating story. I don't want to get into depth at this point. Let's move on to the fourth reading. So now this is the beginning of Moses' second discourse. Again, he calls on the Israelites to hear the laws that he's proclaimed. And the underscore here is that to study and to observe them faithfully, emphasize that God made a covenant with them directly, not with their fathers, but with them, every single one living with them. That God spoke to them face to face, at least through Moses as an intermediary. And then God gives the 10 Commandments. And we could clearly spend many, many lessons going through all the 10 Commandments. I'm going to do something strange. I'm going to actually skip over them because I want to cover some other material. The tie-in with liturgy here is just to ask that we stand while the reader chants the 10 Commandments in the synagogue. And does anyone want to give an interpretation or a thought why we stand at that point?
Well, the people stood on the base of the mountain when they received the law.
Exactly.
Is that, yeah?
Yeah, to recreate as the people were standing directly and receiving the law. Okay, I'm going to skip a few other things about the 10 Commandments to go on to. Please.
What was that?
Do you need the screen share?
Yeah, I was wondering the same thing. Could you get rid of the screen share if you're
Oh,
done?
okay. So.
Screen share.
Did that work?
No,
No.
just,
No.
is there a red button on the top you can hit? There you go.
How's that?
Okay.
Good, okay. So the fifth reading is one of the shorter ones, basically describes how these 10 Commandments were delivered, that God spoke the words to the whole congregation on the mountain with a mighty voice, emphasizing all this dramatic imagery of fire and clouds. And then the salient feature of this fifth aliyah is that God inscribed them on 2 stones of tablets, which God gave to Moses. So that's a summary of our fifth reading, our fifth aliyah. The sixth one is one that we should all identify very, very fast. Moses imparts, now I got to get back to screen share. Give me.
So we asked you if you would screen
No,
share.
no, I'm not, but I'm clearly not emphasizing my, okay. So this is basically the sixth reading. I will assume that everyone can identify this. Anyone want to say a word about it?
Yeah, it looks real familiar.
It looks familiar. All right. just emphasizing that this is Et Hanan, again, is a parsha that we all know very, very well. And I hope that as we say these prayers, because this is said by every observant Jew twice a day, in the morning for Shacharit and the evening for Maldiv, that we will not only think about this from the theological implication, but also be able to relate to the parsha that we're reading. And it's so central that we not only say it twice a day, but of course, as depicted here, it's part of our mezuzah text, because as the last sentence says, to inscribe it on your doorposts and on your gates, we literally do it.
This
Okay.
is a rather poignant moment, because Moses is saying your days of wandering will be over and you will actually be living in houses.
In a stationary place, that's right, David, yeah. Yes.
So then this reading continues. Whoops. Oh, so here's the Shema. Just for those who relate to our Sidur Sim Shalom, this is exactly the page that we read it from. And we should point out that the Shema is also sort of said in an abbreviated form in the Kiddush for Musaf and other times. So it's more than just twice a day. And then in the end of our
I had a question.
Sure.
I'm curious as to how much you had to pay Marty Paley in order to get a parsha with so many winners. Because
Look at the draw.
Well,
I just wonder what the going rate is, Marty.
we had to attest that we got our COVID-19 vaccines.
Very good.
Okay. So as I said, this is a very, very rich parsha et Hanan at the end of the sixth reading. So this comes right before the story of deliverance, when it says, and in turn your children will ask you, what means the decrees, the laws, and the rules that the Lord God has enjoined upon you?
That sounds similar to the Haggadah again.
All right, so Varda gets 2 points for that one.
Oh, really? Before the screen? Oh, wow.
And there it is. This is a quick, it's not only in the Haggadah, in the Magi part,
This
but
is from
it's right
Deuteronomy.
after, yeah, it's right after we read the 4 questions and talk about the 4 sons, Hacham Mahu Yudea. So it's emphasized not only as part of the story, but Dafka is from the wise son that we all know this very, very well.
Yeah. What does it mean to you? So this is Deuteronomy what?
This is Deuteronomy 6:20. This is the end of the 6th reading. Okay. And now in our last and 7th reading, Moses tells the Israelites that God will bring them to the land. But there's sort of a problem there, and that the land is not empty. There's been some real estate development there, and that the land is inhabited by 7 nations. And let's see if I can get my screen share to work this time. Here it is. So this is a 2-pointer. This is a hard one to see if anyone can identify where this part, where God says that the land is inhabited by these 7 nations and that you're going to dislodge them, these nations that are much larger than you. This element is a tough one. See if anyone can find where this mention of these 7 nations appears in our daily liturgy. Can't hear.
Daily Amida. Shacharit.
It is in Shacharit. I don't think it's in Amidah.
No, it's in Amida in Shacharit.
Earlier.
I thought it was from an ancient Israelite census form, but I guess that's wrong.
Good, you haven't found that yet. Okay, so here's the answer. So this one no one's getting, not even a toss up. Here we go. I told you this was a hard one. It's from Psuchei de Zimra. Right over here. This is after we say the last of the 5 Psalms before we get into Shir Hayam. It's mentioned here, if you could read the Hebrew, "V'karoti mo'abrit letet et haaretz," to give the land, the Kanaani, Achiti, Amori, Afusi, Yubishi, Gergashi, letet lezarot, to give to your seed. And it's funny, because I used to say this in the morning, and I always thought it was funny, first reciting these 7 nations and then to think of it. And then I was reading, I realized where it comes from. It's cited here both in this part of Deuteronomy, and it's repeated one other time in Nehemiah. This is actually a quote from Nehemiah. Okay, so
it also strikes me interesting that in the description here, you know, they want to enter the Haaretz HaTova, you know, the good and beautiful land, which is so very, very different than what the spies came back, and they just didn't describe it that way at all. They described the land as a pretty frightening place. I don't have the chapter and verse in front of me, but when I was reading it, I was thinking that, you know, one describes it as a wonderful place, and the other one describes it as a frightening place with huge nations.
So the last thing, how are we doing on time, Marty?
You've got like 10 minutes.
10 minutes, perfect. So let me share one other thing I've been thinking about. And it comes from an article that was forwarded to me by Michael Bonin a little while ago. And the essence of this is to point out that as much as this parsha talks about all the dramatic events that happened at Mount Sinai, and you would think of that as such a central aspect of our theology, and indeed in the Torah it is. The remarkable things that scholars have noted is that the Sinai event, with all its drama and everything, is virtually absent from the rest of the Tanakh. It's not mentioned at any time during the period of the prophets. It's not mentioned in Ketuvim. And it's really quite interesting when you think about how so much other details are provided throughout the Tanakh, but the centrality of the Sinai event is very, very silent. And one of the interpretations is that there's a tension between the prophets. I talked before about how Maimonides said that you shouldn't take away or you shouldn't add to any of the laws that God has given you, but yet the prophets and some of them have actually done it. And whereas the Sinai event is certainly one of the highlights of our narrative, and it's central to our reading here in, I think it was Deuteronomy 4, 9 or 10, if I remember, that Moses reminds the Israelites to remember what happened at Mount Sinai. It's basically silent from there on in. And there are a couple of striking notes here that point out how much it's ignored. And we read one of them a week or two ago, where I think it was in Parsha Masaz, which is the end of the previous book. It talks about all the stops that the Israelites made along the way in the Sinai wilderness. I don't remember how many they enumerate, but it's tens of them. But no mentions made whatsoever of Sinai. It talks about crossing the sea, getting water, various trees at various places. It talks about a lot of minor details, but the Sinai event, the receiving of the Torah at Mount Sinai isn't even part of the list that they stopped there at all. The second piece of information that this article points out, this was written by Rabbi David Franklin, an article about two years ago, that that the events of the Exodus are given in a lot of detail. But again, the Sinai event is absolutely missing in any of the writings about the prophets in Israel's history. And he goes on to build the idea that these laws and regulations were given to Israel both through God, but that the prophets now have usurped a little of this idea that laws could be given by prophets also. And it got me thinking about the fact that Judaism is not locked in stone, no pun intended here, but that there is sort of a 400 or 500 year periodicity of our Judaism. And as a conservative Jew, where we've adopted certain parts of halakha, this really struck me that if you think of this periodicity where we read about the events of the Sinai, but then going into the first temple period and the period of the prophets is up through maybe the exile is a second period where a lot of the prophetic laws are promulgated. We talk about the Talmudic period from about 200 to 600, another 400 or 500 years, where there's a second or even now a third interpretation of Judaism. We go into the period of Maimonides and Nachmanides and Rashi, where we have the great Torah commentaries, which add more interpretations and, dare I say, changes to halakha, even into the Enlightenment thinkers. And now we're living in this period of break-offs of Judaism, which we may think of as 100 years old, but if you think of this periodicity of every 400 or 500 years, it's really at the emergence of Jewish thought. So for me, it's one of the beauties of Judaism that we've maintained a certain amount of our traditions while we're always evolving, reacting, and adopting to the times.
Well, Neil, I'm trying to think of an instance where prophets made new law, and none are coming to mind. I can think of occasions where they emphasized certain laws more than others, but they never created.
I'll walk that back. I'll walk back to not making new ones, but adapting them to what was needed at the time. Yes. Okay. Thank you for that correction.
I think Raina wanted to share something.
Sure.
Yes, I find this pretty fascinating. I'm outside on a walk, so I don't have my Torah in front of me. But as I was reading it yesterday about the experience that the Israelites had on Mount Sinai or at Mount Sinai, it says that they heard the words. They heard the sounds of the words, and that was fascinating to me because I am thinking about what is a mystical experience, a spiritual experience, and so on and so forth. And I'm thinking of perhaps this was a mystical experience, but they needed the teaching. They heard God, they couldn't see God, but this was their mystical experience, but they couldn't, but Moshe had to teach them the chukim, what the decrees and the laws that were brought down from his experience. I don't know really how to explain this, but what you just said sort of brought this together for me. I was pretty fascinated by, they heard the sounds of the words. Somehow they didn't understand, and they needed Moshe to teach them what he brought down.
Rena, I find what you are saying so fascinating in that it parallels so well contemporary Judaism in the United States and around the world other than in Israel, because the majority of Jews who are in our synagogues do not understand the language. They hear the sound, they talk about spirituality, and they need a leader, i.e. the rabbi, to tell them what it means. So that is so exactly what you're talking about from the biblical story here at at the foot of the mountain. And I never quite thought of it that way. I think that it really is, you can really relate it to today.
No,
It
also
reminds
makes,
me. Oh,
go ahead, Marty.
it reminds me of Naseb and Ishma, we'll do and we will hear. That, don't try to figure it out too much, just do it and you'll figure it out later. And so that sort of ties in exactly with what Raina said and what you said, Varda.
But it also makes me think of the fact that Moses's audience consists largely of people who were not at Mount Sinai. A lot of those people have died.
True.
So he is trying to recreate for them the experience of having been there. And in effect, that's what we try to do for ourselves.
But it also connects us to for me, it connects me to the previous generation. It connects me to my parents. It connects me to what I grew up hearing. It was an Orthodox synagogue, but still, it's the same sound. Maybe the chant's different, but the same sounds, and it connects us, to our past.
Well, along those lines, I think that, yes, there are many ways to be connected to our ancestors, and Velda, I'll underscore the sounds and the music certainly do that. In my case, I'm just going to give another plug for what Varda said about understanding the Hebrew, because I grew up learning how to daven, but without understanding a word of what the meaning was. I guess that's an experience certainly for a lot of, I see at least one thumbs up or two thumbs up. That was certainly an experience with my generation or our generation of those who grew up in the United States. And then I was very fortunate to live in Israel for a number of years, learn Hebrew. And then when I came back to the United States, the service very much changed for me. Understanding the words, I got to tell you, it's got some pluses and some minuses, because sometimes there's some words that are a little difficult. I had a discourse with someone just last week about a translation of the word nakama, meaning whether it means revenge or retribution. Sometimes the translators try to change the meaning of theology by softening it for some of our contemporaries who may not be comfortable with the exact words as they were meant by our ancestors. But it also adds a lot in terms of not only the spirituality and the theology, but trying to, at least in my case, understanding those who chose to use these words of prayer, what they were thinking of in a very often a very different time in a very different place. So it also has other aspects of it. So it made me relate to prayer in multiple different dimensions by knowing Hebrew, and that's sort of a plug for learning Hebrew.
Yeah, especially once. Go ahead, Steve.
I wanted to come back because I see our time is running short, to an idea that we had before, and mention a little devar that I had read on the JTS site, which is really lovely if people don't look there. This was written by Michal Springer, who I think is an adjunct at JTS. He wrote this about the Parsha 3 years ago. And it goes back to the line that Neil, you pointed out before. Hadvekim Baronai Elohechem Chaim Kulchem Hayom. And what she translates as, while you who held fast to the Lord your God are still alive today. What she does with it was very interesting. She focuses on this image of holding fast to God with a sense of urgency, and then goes back to the idea of how does the Torah end with stopping short of getting to Eretz Canaan. And her idea, which I find very lovely, says that the promise of life, of abundant life, we're all going to pass away, but of eternal life, is not connected to achievement. It's not an achievement story about how they left Egypt and have now taken over the land. We're not there yet. It's not achievement, but it's about relationship with God. And the idea that we take that line and we say it every time we read the Torah in a community, and that people in a community help each other hold fast to God, which brings eternal life. And I thought that was just a lovely drosh within it, her devar.
Joel?
Joel,
Steve.
Yes,
Joel, hey, Steve.
I'd like to just to talk a little bit about the Ten Commandments, if I could.
Sure.
There is actually two versions. The first version of the Ten Commandments appears in the book of Exodus. And then the second version of the Ten Commandments appears with Moses in Deuteronomy. But it's not exactly the same. There is a reason, possibly, that he changed the words in Deuteronomy, particularly with regard to the third or fourth commandment that deals with Shabbat. When God said in the Exodus version of Deuteronomy, he said, keep the Shabbat. He wanted the people to keep it. This is so important that we have this day of rest. But in the Deuteronomy version, Moses interprets this as remember the Shabbat. Now, remember is not one of our five senses. We are a people of memory, and individuals remember positive or negative things. We all see the same thing, but we all don't remember the same thing. So how do you remember, particularly growing up, how do you remember Shabbat? And how do you remember it today in your life? How do we as a community and people remember these things? Impacts us personally. Do we remember it in a positive way or a negative way?
All right, thank you. How about Cliff?
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate that. And I appreciate the idea of keeping and remembering of all that, because, it's interesting. I guess it's really been in the last couple of years. I have one daughter who lives, I'm in Dallas. I have one daughter who lives in Vancouver, British Columbia, with two sons and in a mixed marriage, and another daughter who lives in Austin, Texas, with two sons in and they're both Jewish. But on Friday nights we get together for the blessing of the children, for the blessings and the blessing of the children, and so in a way that is keeping the Sabbath, and in a way that is remembering. And I found it fascinating because last night, for the first time, my son-in-law, actually, who is Jewish, said, well, now, who in the heck are Ephraim and Manasseh? And why in the heck are we talking about this? And frankly, I had a memory relapse, so I couldn't remember. I eventually went ahead and found it, but it's not something that comes up. But it was, to me, it was like a Passover moment. It was when a child is asking the simple question, but the importance is that they're able to ask it. And the importance is that neither one is diminished by it, but enhanced by it. And so hopefully, regardless, I mean, if we were not having the blessing of the children, then we, or this honoring, they would neither keep nor remember. They would be stuck in a secular limbo. And so all of this has been wonderful. Appreciate everybody and allowing me to be in on this. So thanks.
Wonderful.
Well, thank you.
And
So Varda and Neil, any final comments before we wrap it up?
Yeah, Marty, right, just before we finish up, I just want to thank Marty for the opportunity for Varda and I to do summer shul. As anyone who's done this, you know that it's the preparation and the study that has enormous value. And we've obviously just touched on a little of what we've been reading this past week in preparation for it. And if there's any take-home message here, it's just to let people think about the fact that the total reading that we have every Shabbat, or Monday and Thursday mornings, is not in isolation. We don't start Shacharit, turn off and start again the Torah service. It's that the Torah and our liturgy are very much interconnected. This parsha is certainly very, very rich, and that we should be able to relate to these two elements of our Judaism in an integrated manner.
I liked the quiz. The quiz was a lot of fun. I got the Pesach once, so.
We'll do a retest.
Thank you very much to Varda and Neil. It was a great job. Next week, we have Bob Braitman will be leading us. And tell your friends, I sent out something late yesterday afternoon on TE Talks.
Yeah.
You need to register, as you all know, but tell your friends that you just can't get on. You have to register to avoid Zoom bombing. So why don't we all stand and do Kaddish Derab.
Yitkadosh Shmei
Derabah.
Yamad
Divrach Kirutei.
Yamlich
Lich Malchutei.
L'chayachon Yom Echon L'chayei D'chol Beit Yisrael B'agala V'zman Karim Amen.
Amen.
Yehi Shmei Rabba V'barach L'olam U'le'omayim Yitbarach Yitbar V'yitfar V'yitnaser
Say.
Yithadar V'yitaleh V'yitalach Shnei V'yitor V'yiku Ve'ela V'yitor V'chatav V'shiratav Rush V'chatav V'nechatav Gam Yam V'yam V'yilu Amen Al Yisrael V'al Rabbanan V'al Talmidei V'al Talmidei Talmidei V'al Kol Man V'al Rabbanan V'chaim tovim aleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'yilu amen. Oseh shalom v'bracha, u'yaseh shalom, aleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'yilu amen.
Amen.
Shabbat shalom.
Shalom.
Yoshikoa to the fathers.
Yashar koach.
Thank
Yoshikoa
you.
to the fathers.
Shabbat shalom, everyone.
Yasher koach.